Hello, my name is Bruce. I was asked by a friend from church to put together something that could maybe be helpful for kids who are in quarantine and homeschooling at the moment in regard to Shakespeare. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a couple of monologues, and a third we'll look over, and you'll do them too. So basically, if you don't want to hear this preamble, shoot ahead to the toward the latter part of the tape here, 10 or 15 minutes before the end. But that'll be kind of like going to the last page of a book, so you can do that, but I think it's best to go through the whole thing here. But if you do that, it won't just be you listening to me doing monologues, you will also do them as well. And I have a couple of little words of advice in regard to that. Okay, so let me say a few of my notes here. So why Shakespeare? Isn't, as Johnny in the back row there says, it's kind of boring and people talk funny. And he's right. It can be boring, and I must say in my years at thespian school, my favorite class was the talking funny class. But so that certainly happens. And it can be boring if it's not done well, but it can be good too. So let's ask a couple of questions. Okay. First of all, what is theatre? Okay. 3 words: audience, actors, play. That's what theatre is. And these 3 monologues I do, each of them will pertain to each of those words. Some more on that later. Okay, now, before we get in here, you've got some homework to do, and you've got some play to be had. So your homework is anytime I make a statement, you write it down, whether you think it's objective or subjective, whether it's a fact or my opinion. I've once said there's something I would say to journalists, that I think that journalists should have stapled to their forehead to ascertain veracity of assertions. I would say tattoo, but Leviticus precludes that. So ascertain, it's a big, pretentious word, just means make certain, that's all. Make certain the facts are right. So that's what you're going to do. When I say something, stop the tape, write it down. Is it objective? Is it subjective? Is that my opinion or is that a fact? And check them out. Okay, so materials needed. You can get by these days just with the interwebs. But ideally, every household should have a complete works of Shakespeare. I personally prefer the Riverside. Also, the Oxford's good, the Arden's good. The Riverside, the small detrimental aspect is it uses American spellings. I'm a classicist, so I prefer the Anglicized, but it's very good though. What I would suggest for kids is a wonderful volume put out equidistant betwixt Shakespeare and us. Equidistant is another wonderful word, just meaning equal distance, so basically 200 years ago. It was a compendium called The Tales of Shakespeare. It was written by Charles and Mary Lamb, brother and sister, who basically took about 20 of his plays and narrowed them down to about 20 pages. And they cleaned up the language, because Shakespeare, as good as he is, can be a little funky sometimes. So took out some of the adult themes and made it quite child-friendly, but still retains the beauty of the language and tells a very succinct, in Polonius's words, brevity is the soul of wit. They are brevity personified, 20 pages. Other resources that would be good to have: of course, a good dictionary. I like the Oxford English Dictionary, but Webster, any others, or again, you can use the interwebs, that works too. The Fervent Years is a good book to have by Harold Clurman, which is basically it talks of the group theater, which was in the 1930s, after the Moscow Art Theater visited America. Moscow Art Theater was set up in 1896 by Stanislavski. Had a seagull as a symbol. Obviously, that was written from the play The Seagull, written by Chekhov. And they toured America in the 20s. That was influenced Strasberg and Harold Clurman, Cheryl Crawford, to start the group theater, which moved into the Actors Studio back in the 40s. And basically, the American School of Acting was very much influenced that. Not directly Shakespeare, but when we get into one of the monologues about acting, I think it's a precursor of what he did. Okay, and the only other resource, which is a recent thing, when we speak of theatre, I think The Classicist was basically a pamphlet written by Aristotle called Poetics, which basically you have comedy and tragedy. So comedy is basically once upon a time they live happily ever after. People get to with the right people. Tragedy, similar thing. Difference is that tragedy etymologically means goat song. So basically the goat has to be sacrificed for the village to be cleansed. So that's basically what happens. Is that the protagonist has a fatal flaw. So biblically we have the fall. Pride comes before the fall. In the Greek notion, it was hubris, invites nemesis, leads to catharsis. And a modern update of that is a wonderful book called The Risk Theatre Model of Tragedy by Edwin Wong. Kind of modernizes and updates it somewhat. Okay, so that's the materials. Alrighty. So, what is good acting? What is good theatre? Okay. The three tiers, TIERS, 3 layers of good acting, good theatre, is similar to education. In education, you have primary school, secondary school, tertiary school. You pass primary school, finish it, go to secondary. Finish that, go to tertiary, university, college. With acting and theatre, I think the primary level is it believable? The actors, is a situation believable? That's primary. Secondary, built upon that, is it compelling? Sometimes something is believable, but it doesn't really draw you in. It's not compelling. It's a secondary level. And the tertiary level is it relevant? Sometimes something is believable, it's compelling, it draws you in, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really have any pertinence to your life. So that's the 3 tiers of what constitutes good acting and theatre. All right. So, why do we celebrate Shakespeare? Okay. Why do we celebrate Shakespeare? Okay, the modern notion of celebrity is people think of fame, somebody who's famous. We celebrate that. And oftentimes, of course, they're false idols. And false idols have feet of clay, as we find out the more we know about our celebrities. But should people be celebrated? Now, as a Christian, I think that Christ should be worshipped. Anybody less than Christ should not be worshipped. But to celebrate, I think there are people worthy of celebration. And I think in historical sense, I think there would be my medalist, as it were. Obviously, I just mentioned Christ. He would obviously get the gold. If one wasn't a Christian, that could be thought of as being sacrilegious. But I'm Christian, and I do believe that he walked the earth, so I think he gets the gold. Shakespeare gets the bronze, he gets the silver, and Socrates. And for those who say, oh gee, there's no philosophers or scientific people there, I beg to differ. I'd suggest Socrates and the Socratic method. Hypothesis, antithesis, synthesis is the parameters of scientific and philosophic thought. So, that's the historical medals, subjectively, as I think of it. Modern would be bronze, would be Beethoven, silver would be Van Gogh, gold, Shakespeare. Anyway, so, why Shakespeare? Why do we celebrate Shakespeare? All right. Some say Shakespeare was the best writer ever. Some argue that. Some say he was merely the best writer in English. And some argue that and say, well, he wasn't the best writer in English, but he was the best playwright in English. And some people argue that, say, well, he didn't even invent his plays. There was only one plot line that he invented. That was the Merry Wives of Windsor. And other ones were other sources that he took, and he extrapolated stories and reverted things around. So, okay, so in that case, why do we celebrate Shakespeare? So what did Shakespeare do? He wrote a couple of, he wrote a number of sonnets. He wrote when the theatres were closed because of plague, something we can relate to possibly, and a couple of narrative poems. But mostly, of course, he wrote plays. And mostly they were taken from other sources. So of course we celebrate him for the words within the plays, between the characters, the dialogue. Okay. That's what he wrote. What did he write? What form did he write? Okay, he wrote verse and prose. Earlier on, it was a bit more structured, a bit more specifically verse. And later on, he broke it up a little bit more. He combined verse and prose. There was different genres. Early on, there was history, tragedy, and comedy. Later on, romance, which, as I say, was kind of a synthesis of other forms. And within verse, it's called blank verse, as opposed to rhymed verse. So this is a mathematic structure that does not necessarily rhyme. Sometimes it does, especially at the end of a scene. You may have a rhyming couplet. A little note on the sonnets that basically take the form of 14 lines. And generally speaking, it's all within the iambic pentameter. It has 8 lines, almost like a Socratic hypothesis, and then you have 4 lines almost opposing that, and then 2 lines of almost synthesis. And the last 2 are often a rhyming couplet, but all within the iambic form. What is iambic pentameter? Okay, pentameter, what is that word? Penta, from the Greek 5. Pentagram, pentagon, penta. So 5. 5 what? 5 iambs. Da 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 da. 5 iambs. So it takes 10 syllables. Sometimes it will be a 12-syllabic line. It's still retaining the masculine. Sometimes it'll be 11 or 9. That breaks the form. That's the odd number is called a feminine line. And some argue that a character like Hamlet, who we'll look at later, has a number of those lines because of his psychological imbalance, and that's why it has the feminine ending. But some interesting notions, essays on that. Okay, so that's the... Oh, and there's aspects within there that Shakespeare utilizes. There's aspects of antithesis. There's aspects of onomatopoeia. Onomatopoeia is a wonderful word. It means that, look it up, it's a wonderful word, see how it's spelled. It basically means a word that means what it sounds like. So a bomb goes bang. A snake hisses. So within the word you have the meaning of the word, and Shakespeare uses that a lot. There's something that's called a caesura. And caesura is an interesting word, C-A-E-S, etc. From Caesar, who we'll look at later. And as in Caesarean section, with a birth where you cut. So it's where a line has a caesura, is where the line is cut in two. One side is juxtaposed against the other. So different techniques that Shakespeare will use within his prose and his verse. Okie doke. So that brings us up to... we're going to... One second.